morning, everyone, and welcome to the Rocky Mountain MS Center's webinar series, Maximizing Lifelong Brain Health in MS. Today's topic is Facing and Managing the Cognitive Challenges of MS. This presentation features Jeffrey Gingold, an outspoken advocate on MS and cognitive disability. Jeffrey is the internationally acclaimed author of the award-winning book, Facing the Cognitive Challenges of Multiple Sclerosis, 2nd edition, and Mental Sharpening Stones, Manage the Cognitive Challenges of Multiple Sclerosis. Jeffrey was diagnosed with MS in 1996 and continues to author numerous articles for U.S. and international publications. He's been a guest on the Montel Williams Show, NPR, and numerous webcasts and national talk radio shows. He was inducted into the 2010 and 2012 National MS Society Hall of Fame, and has spoken and been interviewed worldwide regarding the MS cognition topic. In 2014, his first MS book was translated into Polish, and in 2015, his second book was published into Dutch. Jeffrey donates 100% of his royalties from his MS publications directly to MS research and education. He enjoys ice speed skating and spending time with his wife, Terry, and 2 adorable daughters, Lauren and Meredith. We would also like to thank the pharmaceutical companies who have provided patient education grants to support this series. Thank you to Genentech, Biogen, Celgene, and Novartis. This webinar will feature about 30 to 40 minutes of presentation, followed by a Q&A session. If you missed something on a slide, we will be archiving this webinar on our website, www.mscenter.org, so you can replay it at any time. You can submit questions at any time during the hour by typing them into the chat window on your screen. We will answer as many questions as time allows. Jeffrey is joining us remotely all the way from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Jeffrey, thank you for taking time today to talk with us about such an important topic. I'll hand the microphone over to you. Take it away.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to share with all of you today. I would like to accomplish a couple things. First, I want to share a little bit of my MS background, so maybe you can gain some perspective on the frustration of facing cognitive challenges by learning from my experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Second, I would hope to share some successful tactics for dealing with cognitive symptoms as a better way of understanding what may be occurring to you, and also, in the end, share some resources that support that discussion. In the end, I promise to place in your hands a few specific resources to support and fill in some of the cognitive blanks. So why are we here for this webinar? It's simple. It is to learn about your MS and the cognitive difficulties which you may be facing, so you can identify the moments that they occur and be prepared to deal with them. Now, what are the cognitive symptoms? Well, be aware that with MS, beyond the physical part, there's a silent, I've always seen it as silent struggle. There are stealth MS symptoms that just don't fit, at least for me it didn't, in the anticipated box of physical symptoms that you're handed when you're diagnosed. You can face slowed speed of thinking and recall, not erasing, just blocking the access to the information that you have. Difficulties with word finding, sometimes word jams. Maybe I'll demonstrate that this morning for you. Delayed recognition of familiar places, faces, friends and family, and confounded, messed up conversations that just get stuck. You don't remember where you were. It's a different kind of numbing. It's a numbing, I call it, of cognitive functions. All of this, both the physical and the cognitive challenges and disability, are MS. Now, what is my MS cognitive background? Yes, MS is a chronic, progressive, and brutally disabling disease, but it's more than just the physical disability stuff. In 1996, MS, well, it wasn't in my plans. My wife and I were expecting our second child. I was a litigation attorney and enjoyed running by the lakefront here in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, and ice speed skating. Like many people diagnosed with MS, my limbs numbed and fatigued. I lost my equilibrium and ended up being thrown to the floor and into a few walls. My vision became obstructed by optic neuritis, and then after all that stuff, the cognitive impediments, which delayed and confounded my thoughts, causing the spoken words, remember I was a lawyer, to be lost, trashing my multitasking and sometimes obscuring my ability to recall very familiar memories, familiar faces, tasks, locations, directions. My initial experience with cognitive problems shocked me, and I didn't see it coming because nobody talked about it. I was in court at the time, sitting next to a client, and it was my turn to speak, and I turned to look at her, and I couldn't recognize her. She wasn't familiar. I looked down in my handwritten notes that I had prepared for the hearing, and they were unfamiliar too. I was mentally lost, and MS wasn't even a thought at the time. Something was happening, and I had no preparation or explanation for it at the time. Even my neurologist at the time, hint, hint, had no clue. And she suggested, well, maybe you're tired and you should take more vacation. Of course, that wasn't a recommended treatment for MS, but there was no vacation from MS. But for me, this was going to be my multiple sclerosis, initially the physical symptoms, now along with unexplained stealth cognitive symptoms, and then the unanticipated disability associated with it. I was asked to talk about a few common examples that people may deal with from MS cognitive challenges. For me and many others, they may face slowed speed of thinking and recall, meaning delayed recognition of familiar places and faces. They may also have difficulties concentrating. I have great difficulties shifting my attention. I told him my multitasking was trashed. I'm typically heard around the house saying one thing at a time, one conversation at a time. Maybe I don't do very well with people interrupting and kicking me off to a different subject. I may never get back to what I was talking about. I also have trouble remembering new information and details. I like to say that perhaps my mental clipboard is a little full at this time. It just doesn't stick. If people throw their names or telephone numbers or a list of information at me, I'll hear it, but I won't recall it 2 minutes later. I have word-finding problems. I'll have a thought, and by the time I'm about to say it, it's just sitting there on the tip of my tongue, but it won't come out, and I can't force it. You may also face a slowness of understanding what is heard or being written. It just doesn't stick for me to my memory. I physically heard what was said, or I can see what was written, but I may not remember what it was about, what it was related to, especially if it comes in fast and I'm distracted. I have problems following directions, so I ask people to repeat, and sometimes repeat, and then slowly repeat it again, and then maybe write it down. I will ask people if they want to give me a phone number, if they can write down the number for me, because even as they say it, by the time it gets into my ears, into my head, it doesn't come out in my hand accurately so I can write it down. I'll get lost and very frustrated, so I'll just say, attorney, my handwriting is terrible. Can you just do me a favor, write it down for me? Problem solved. I have trouble with decision making, difficulty going to restaurants, as a simple example, with huge menus that have page after page after page of items. I have a couple of favorites. I just get stuck with too many options. Takes too long to think about it. Sometimes I forget mid-sentence what I started to talk about. It also may be a problem with location. I may be going somewhere in the car or in my home. I'll walk into the kitchen and I'll ask myself, now why did I come into the kitchen? I know I had a reason. I was supposed to do something or get something, and I'll forget why I came all the way downstairs and went into the kitchen. So I'll have to back completely up, and hopefully I'll remember. Something may trigger the thought. Sometimes I have to write it down or I'll forget it again. I have difficulty starting or finishing large projects, which could be, I shouldn't say large, it could be as simple as a recipe or even balancing my checkbook. Again, I don't retain easily the information from 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago. So following a trail of logical thought is difficult. Cognitive decline can be seen in a person's daily living. It can affect household management, their personal and family care, and it can be the main reason, not just the physical stuff, but it can be the main reason that people leave work when they have MS, or they'll give up recreational activities that they love. Now, what are our numbers, MSers, people with MS? The MS Society, National MS Society, has put it between 50 and 65% of the MS population, to a greater or lesser extent, will face cognitive challenges. I've seen some say as little as 40%, some as high as 70%. I've made it really simple. I like the MS Society's number, 50 to 65%. I say at least half of us, to one degree or another, may face cognitive challenges. Now, these MS cognitive symptoms have been, and still are, under-recognized, underdiagnosed, and frequently misdiagnosed. But the cognitive decline, for me, it's a different kind of numbing. I mentioned before mental numbing. It's like living in an invisible mental wheelchair. There is no cane or anything else for others to necessarily see. I have a cane to deal with numbness in my leg and equilibrium, all those other fun problems, but I don't have a cane which tells people, oh, he's having a cognitive difficulty right now. Maybe my face will go blank, or I'll stumble verbally, but it's difficult to see. If you're having a cognitive moment jam up your thinking, it's hard to read. For the MS community facing their cognitive difficulties, I think there are two crucial, also silent questions. One, people ask themselves, well, am I losing my mind? I don't think so. This is not Alzheimer's or dementia. Those problems are real, and they're out there, and there's some similarity maybe with some of the symptoms, but it's not that. No, you're not losing your mind. Maybe a little bit more difficult to get access to what you know, but if you went to college, you still have the degree. You also still may owe the tuition. MS does not erase that. Two, is there anything you can do to slow down the disconnection of thoughts? Well, yes. When you're diagnosed with MS, I will bet that you are not told, okay, you have MS, now go home and handle it by yourself. Hopefully you weren't told that. Now, you don't get to choose your symptoms or your disability from MS, but you do get to decide how to deal with them, especially the cognitive impediments. Now, my path is not the same for everyone, and I don't suggest that. The purpose of my first book, Facing the Cognitive Challenges of MS, was to sort of kick open the cognition door of discussion and share what I have faced and the methods that worked for me. The second book, Mental Sharpening Stones, shares the stories of some very well-known medical professionals and people with MS who also have dealt with cognitive challenges. People that you may be familiar with, Richard Cohen, for example. Excellent discussion. He is an Emmy award-winning writer. He's a best-selling author. You may have read some of his books. You might also know the relationship that he has with his wife, Meredith Vieira, keeps him cognitively sharp, and he talks about that in the chapter in Mental Sharpening Stones. There's also a chapter with the retired, I think now retired, Chief Justice of the Colorado Supreme Court, Mary Malarkey, who also has MS, and she talks about her strategies for staying sharp. These are very honest conversations from people with MS dealing with cognition concerns, sharing their strategies to maintain, whether it's their employment, their marriage, whatever, for a vital life. And again, as was mentioned in the intro, all the royalties, you know authors get royalties, all the royalties from these books, I've donated all of it, 100% to MS education and research. That's what it's all about. When I am asked, generally, how do I cope with cognitive impediments, I'm happy to share that information, but I always tell people it's kind of like sitting in my car driver's seat. If you get into my car, the first thing you're going to do is want to change everything. Same thing with MS and cognition challenges and strategies. You're going to want to adjust them for your comfort. When you get in my car, you're going to want to move the seat maybe up, maybe back. You're going to adjust the rear view mirror, the side view mirrors. You're probably going to turn the air conditioner down. If you're going to play with the music stations, please put back what I was listening to. But you need to make it comfortable for yourself. Same thing with the cognition impediments. If you check out, and I encourage you to check out what other people have said, you need to find what works for you. Now, how do you do that? I advise that you have a cognitive game plan for yourself in advance of a difficult moment. When in the midst of dealing with a MS disconnected cognitive moment, I have found that's the worst time to explain to somebody. You don't get a commercial break. You don't get to step away from the moment and say, well, what he's dealing with over there, he's having difficulty remembering the words or who he was talking. No, you don't get to do that. It's kind of like if you started coughing and people come up and they say, are you all right? You really can't explain why you're coughing until you're done coughing. Same thing with MS. And the cognitive challenges, I think it's important to work out strategies for yourself in advance before the moments occur. It would be like being tossed into the middle of a football game already in play and not have any clue what you're doing. Remaining silent from whether it's stubbornness, self-isolation, or lack of direction can get you leveled with cognition. This discussion is about how you can form your own game plan and to get help and then to do it. I was asked to also explain a few cognitive pitfalls that I have faced. Now, these are personal, but they probably will echo with many others. One, I have trouble retrieving memories. They're not erased again, but I just will have difficulties remembering who that person is or what happened at a certain time. And I've learned that the harder I try to remember it, it's jammed. But if it's a significant thing that I'm trying to figure out, excuse me, I will write down the question and I'll put it aside. And when my mind is clear and less distracted and a little removed from whatever I was talking about, the answer tends to surface. Now, sometimes, yes, it may be 2 in the morning, and I'll sit up in bed and say, Spiro Agnew. That was Spiro Agnew, the vice president, who, that's what I was trying to, yes, at 2 in the morning. It does happen. Sometimes when I'm not following a conversation, I can hear the words, but it doesn't make sense to me, or the conversation is too long. I don't understand what's being asked. I will ask people to either, could you clarify that? Could you do me a favor and repeat that? I didn't quite catch that. What that is my tactic for buying time to catch up. Maybe I'll write something down. Maybe I'll listen to it again and again. Again, it's a little strategy. Hopefully it's not too annoying, but the idea is not to lose the conversation. But if they repeat it, I have a better chance of getting it the second or third time. Sometimes I also do word switching. My wife has pointed this out many times. I will be talking and I will use the wrong words or the wrong names to describe something. And what I encourage you to do, if this has been pointed out or if you've noticed it for yourself, is to note the frequency of it. Maybe it's one of those things folks say, oh, I do that. I do that all the time. Right. But we're talking about MS and cognition. So if you start to do it more frequently than once in a blue moon, note the frequency of it and maybe talk to your neurologist, neuropsychologist. They may refer you to a speech therapist. I don't know. But note the frequency and bring it to someone's attention. This is hard to admit. It is very hard to admit that maybe you're not in sync with your words or your thoughts. But if your thoughts and what you're saying are not coming out correctly, wouldn't you like to know about it? And wouldn't you like to know about it because maybe everybody else in the room notices it? So wouldn't you like to know it too? So you may do something about it. I believe that dealing with MS cognitive impediments begins with 3 simple steps. I'll call them ABC, not the Jackson 5 song, but 3 simple steps. A, each of us with MS must learn, we must, to recognize and acknowledge, that's the A, acknowledge, our cognitive difficulties, and then assemble your support team, whether it's medical, family, or friends. Again, I talked about getting in front of this, having a plan in advance. It would include these people, whether it's a spouse, significant other, whoever is your trusted friends. Acknowledge and tell them this is what you're seeing. These are the difficulties that you have. Then B, then you will have a better, you will have a better understanding of the MS cognitive difficulties with your thinking and memory by getting an informed discussion. The B was the better and the better understanding. It's good to talk to someone who professionally gets this and can explain it to you, that it's not, you're not making this up. It's not just in your mind. Well, actually, technically, maybe it is in your mind, but I don't mean like that. It's good to have a professional who gets it to explain it and validate what you're experiencing. And then C, which is the coping part. Cope by learning to ask and accept some help. Benefit, why not, from successful cognitive tactics of others. There are many other people who have been there and done that. That's why the books are written, articles are written. Coping is best done, I think, by learning from others. Again, you're not supposed to figure this out totally by yourself, but realize that it's not the same answer for everyone. Different people need different mental sharpening techniques, so you're going to have to choose what works for you. Now, you don't get to the coping, the C, unless you get to the A and B, because if you don't acknowledge that you're having some cognitive challenges, and if you don't, B, seek a better understanding of what may be happening to you, well, then the coping, you'll never get to the coping. So first, acknowledge, do a little research, a little reading, and better understand, or see a professional, better understand what's going on, and then check out all the strategies that have been laid out. To best sharpen your mental discipline, like physical exercise, it does need to be done regularly. You can't hire someone else to do it for you. It's going to take some personal effort. Now, what are I was asked to share with you my 5 top tips, not my David Letterman top 10 list, but these are my 5 top tips for dealing with cognitive sharpening. What works for me, what I do almost on a daily basis. 1, I have recorded a daily structure, a daily to-do list, what I need to accomplish, things I need to update, things I need to get back to. I like doing lists because I enjoy crossing things off. That makes me feel like I'm accomplishing something. But pick your priorities when you do this. Be realistic for that day or each morning or the next day. You don't write down re-roof the house, then repaint, oil change the car. Be realistic what you're going to do, but put it on a list so you don't forget, and prioritize. That leads to number 2. I like to schedule items to the strength. I think it's useful to do the most cognitively draining things when you have the energy to deal with it. Cut loose the rest of the stuff or put it on a list for another day. But identify the times of the day, it's different for everybody, that you're cognitively sharpest for the most demanding mental activities. Now, some people it's first thing in the morning. Some people it's right before dinner or late at night. Again, it's different, yes, for everybody. But when you identify, I do my best work right after lunch, that's when maybe you want to balance the checkbook. Maybe that's when you want to do your taxes. Again, cognitive sharpness for mental activities that are demanding. See if you can hook them up. Pick your priorities and guard that time from distractions. Respond to all those texts later in the day at a time when maybe your energy is down for a bit. Take all the telephone calls that you have to return. Again, do it later. Don't use your best energy to change the cat litter. Save it for the things that you really want to get done. I also believe it's useful to have routines for items. I like the TV remote, where the TV remote goes. I like my keys to be in a certain spot, bills in a certain spot, and remind others who live with you, near you, just to respect the routine so you don't have to recreate, now where did I put that every single day. Routines are okay, and if that helps you, that's a good strategy so that you don't waste time chasing things, wondering where you put it. I'm on number 4, which is try to do one thing or have one conversation at a time. I've spoken about my multitasking sort of disappearing. But it's helped me to stay in the moment, talking to someone, doing one project, and not allowing distractions to come in and see the project through, and not putting it down and leaving a bunch of half-started projects all over the house. I try to do one thing at a time or one conversation at a time. That is a skill. And the skill is learning to say to people, you know, thank you for interrupting me, not really, but not right now. Please give me one moment to finish this, please, and I'll get to that, or I'll get back to you. Just one moment. That's a skill to say that. Number 5, and this is probably one of the most important things for me on a daily basis, I like to have or rely on what I've called a safety person. For me, it's my wife and our girls. They have an advanced understanding of how I cope with cognitive challenges, how I use my best moments or not. And if they see that I'm struggling talking to somebody, or I'm being overwhelmed in a group conversation, I don't deal very well with those. They help to delay the moment, explain the moment, translate the moment, maybe repeat it, or answer for me without embarrassment. They're not going to turn to me and say and ask me to say out loud in front of other people, "What's the matter? Are you having one of those problems?" No, they already know I have one of those problems, and they're able to step in and get me to a calm place, a quiet place, buy me a few moments. They know how to do that. It's not very hard, but with that advanced knowledge, you're safe. And that's why I call them my safety person. If you have true cognitive concerns, or other people have noticed that and mentioned it to you, then you may also want to have a neuropsych, I don't know if that's the right way to call it, a neuropsych exam to set a benchmark. Even if everything seems to be fine, but you have noticed some things, wouldn't it be nice to know where you are now? So if things become more serious or it happens more frequently, you can see how it's changed from earlier. I suggest, again, I'm not a doctor and I don't play one on TV anymore. I'm just kidding about that. I think it's important to see a neurologist and talk to someone who understands the 65%, the half of us who deal with this. And if you're dealing with someone, if you're being treated by somebody who doesn't believe that cognition is a part of MS, which is very old school, my strongest recommendation is it is time for a second opinion. Now, what do I recommend? In summary, I recommend that you consider and seek these 4 things. First, we've talked about honest communication. Cognitive challenges are difficult to see, yes. Acknowledging them requires a degree of vulnerability, and it can be a little uncomfortable because we're making our weaknesses, our mental, our cognitive weaknesses public. But openly communicating, I talked about a safety person, helps both you and the person you care about better understand what may be happening. Maybe this is a better way to think about it. Picture your significant other in your cognitively challenged shoes. Switch places mentally. Now, if the situation was reversed and they were having cognitive problems, recognizing, remembering, then wouldn't you like to know about what they were experiencing and how you could help, or maybe just get out of the way sometimes? Wouldn't you like to understand better? Well, now flip it back the other way. And people who are significant to you, maybe they should know. So share with the people that you trust so they better understand and can better help, or get out of the way, better help with what you're dealing with. Back to number 2, counseling. Now, it isn't what you may react to. Ooh, counseling, I don't know if I like that. Hear me through. I think counseling, especially with cognitive challenges, is very useful. It can help you identify your MS cognitive hotspots and find an agreed strategy, an agreed response. It's having somebody else in the room. Instead of you talking to your significant other, spouse, family members, friends, whoever joins you in that counseling session, instead of you trying to explain this, an informed professional can explain the impediments and the coping strategies. Having someone uniquely qualified to explain MS cognitive challenges, someone else, can really ease the stress of the problems while calmly directing both of you to a workable solution. And maybe the person will say, so you're really not making this up, huh? Well, no, you're not. Maybe let the professional explain it and jointly learn the coping tactics. You don't have to validate or justify anything. Let them explain that this is real. Number 3 is you have the right to be angry and frustrated with all this, but avoid collateral damage by doing nothing about it. Refocus what you're doing and do something about your MS. Maybe volunteer with an MS organization or not, but having MS, the physical and the cognitive challenges, should not be an end point. It should be a chance to refocus, and the energy you do have, find something to share. And number 4, I believe in, if you laugh at yourself first, especially in the cognitive moments, and boy, I've had quite a few. Some I could put in print, some I could not put into the book. But if you laugh first, then you don't have to worry if others notice your confusion, because then maybe they'll understand, oh, he or she knows. They're kind of chuckling at themselves. You shake your head. With prior sharing and coping skills in place, maybe you don't have to take yourself so seriously, and don't waste your energy on anger and frustration. Again, collateral damage. Just laugh it off and move your mind to a calmer place and maybe come back to it, and hopefully it'll work, or somebody will help you if you have a safety person. Finally, and maybe it is the most important thing, I believe it's very useful with all of this to show appreciation for the support that you have, for the people who understand and assist you. Thank them and let them know that you know that they're helpful to you and that they're making a difference. And kind of like the shampoo instructions, repeat often, more than once a day. Now, remember that while cognitive difficulties may be unseen, they are real. And all of this conversation is about avoiding being told, but you look fine. Why don't you remember what I tell you? Well, share in advance. Doing nothing about MS and the cognitive challenges, doing nothing is not an approved treatment for MS. I've never read that. Again, I've never seen anything that says, go home and do nothing about it. Of course not. Now, my earlier promise, I wanted to place a few specific useful resources in your hands. I believe after we're done online or however they handle it, there will be a list of vital resources that I have shared and will be available to whoever is listening to this conversation. But I wanted to hit two of them. One, I really like, it's the Staying Smart site out of the UK. It's a web-based resource, and I've done some work with these people. They've brought me over to England a couple times, and we've done a few videos which are also online. If you go to the Staying Smart site and check them out, I'm the one without the British accent. It's a web-based resource designed for people who want to know how MS can affect their thinking, especially with everyday problems like I forget where I put things all the time. They have tons of tips and tricks along with gadgets and gizmos, all sorts of useful things to manage cognitive impediments. The second one is a paper that recently came out just this past year, and I think it's a paper that everyone with MS, especially the cognitive challenges, should be aware of it. It's entitled Recommendations for Cognitive Screening and Management in Multiple Sclerosis Care. It is a well-researched paper by what I'm going to call the who's who of researchers, MS researchers, endorsing the implementation of an ongoing assessment, repeating, in other words, not just once, but checking in on a regular basis, an ongoing assessment of a person's MS cognitive difficulties to benchmark and to track their MS cognitive deficits so we're all on the same page. It promotes understanding cognitive impairment in MS. It recommends optimal screening, which we all deserve, monitoring, which we all deserve, and treatment strategies. And it also addresses the barriers that exist to all of those things, so hopefully you can work past them. It has a wealth of MS cognition research studies noted in the paper. I strongly encourage you to check out the depth of the work to quantify, analyze, treat, and care for those facing cognitive challenges. It's a paper I think you should be aware of. You don't have to memorize it. There's no test. But you should be aware that this update exists, and feel free to refer to it and to rely on this impressive and reliable cognition discussion and share it with people who maybe don't understand it. I believe, especially if there are cognition concerns, that every person with MS should have the expectation to have a cognitive assessment to be a part of their MS workup, period. It should be available, and you should ask for it. Sometimes you need to be a little proactive with your cognitive concerns, but you should expect it. The research backs it up. The MS Society backs it up. Pretty much any legitimate MS organization, any informed MS organization would back it up. This is out there. The strategies are out there. I encourage you, again, be proactive for yourself. Now, I've been told I can be a little blunt in my, I'll call it irreverent, in my MS discussion. Oh well. But I do take highlighting the MS cognitive concerns very seriously. And I encourage you to do the same. And where appropriate, expect a cognitive assessment along with searching out and welcoming some coping strategies that, again, make sense for you, but you have to check it out. I seriously appreciate your time this morning and interest in the MS cognitive topic. I have been out to Colorado. The Rocky Mountain folks have invited me out a few times in the past, and I'd welcome that opportunity again if there's an interest, but you have to express it. I'm happy at this point to answer any questions as the time allows until somebody does that beep sound like Bob Newhart and they say, sorry, our time is up. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. That was fantastic. Just a reminder to folks, if you have questions, please submit them using the chat window on your screen. And again, just reiterating, we will be sending out an email with all of those lists, the list of resources, the links, the books, and everything. So you guys will have all of that in your email following this webinar. We do have a couple questions to get us started. We have one that asks, how can one tell the difference between MS cognitive and age-related cognitive issues? And kind of related, does the treatment depend on the cause?
How can you tell the difference between the two? Well, my first answer to that, again, highlighting that I'm not a doctor, but I've seen many of them, is it also can be both at the same time, and you shouldn't try to figure it out by yourself. I hope that you're receiving help from a medical professional and that they could point you. And sometimes medical professionals don't know everything, but some of the best answers I've received from them come in the form of recommending that I see a specialist. And if that makes sense, it's a very good question because it's confusing to be dealing with both, and you may not necessarily know what the cause is, but I strongly suggest see a professional and have it benchmark. They should be able to differentiate the two for you, I would think, I would hope.
So we have another question. Do you have any particular tips for people who are single or living alone?
Do I have any tips for people who are single and living alone? Yes. I talked about lists, and lists can be like I like it. I like it written down on a piece of paper. If you were to come in my house, you'd see little Post-it notes all over the place. But it's more than that. I have a list for projects in the house, short-term projects, and long-term, which normally means more expensive, projects in the house. So I don't waste my time going to the hardware store and getting one thing. I have a list, and the list may be accumulated over a couple days, maybe a week or so. I also have a list when I have to go to, we'll just call it a pharmacy, whether it's Walgreens, CVS, whatever you have in your area, so you don't waste your time, spin your wheels, and do one thing at a time. Have a cumulative list. Maybe it deals with finances. Maybe you need a safety. I talked about having a safety person. Do you have, we'll call it, I'm doing the parentheses thing around the word, people. People who help you with your finances. People who help you care in the home a little bit. People who help you, I don't know if you're living in an apartment or living in a home, but somebody you can rely on who understands in advance your MS concerns. And you don't need to have family. A lot of people, they live alone. Some people are off in school. Some people are off in various cities. And I think it's important to find someone to trust, someone to talk to, someone who understands. And maybe the local MS organization that you rely on can also refer you to someone to talk to about this. But again, you shouldn't have to do this by yourself. And I think I've gone a little sideways on this, but I like using various lists and not losing them to stay organized.
Do you have any specific tips on, remembering to look at the list? Sometimes that can be a challenge, or, you look at a list and then immediately forget afterwards.
That is a great question. You don't want to maybe have a list of your lists. That would be kind of redundant. But I have routines, and I'm fortunate to have my family around me. They will refer, and I've given them permission to remind me. For example, this conference, this webinar was set up to start at a certain time this morning, and even though there were emails and there were notes around the house and on my computer, my wife this morning, before she went to work, said, "Now what time? Do you have to call knowing we're talking in different time zones? Have you double-checked that?" And even though I thought I did 5 times over, I checked it again, and there's nothing wrong with that, and she understands. I didn't have to over-explain, but that helped, having somebody else know that. The reminders, like I said, were on the computer. Actually, there's one on the refrigerator. I tried to keep it in front of my mind in different ways, and that worked, and here we are.
How would you discuss MS cognitive issues with colleagues at work?
How would you describe it? I don't know if you're talking about colleagues, meaning the person at the desk next to you, or if it's an HR person. It also depends on how big work is. You have to be careful sometimes. Sometimes, in order to receive the protection of the law, you have to let HR know that you have these challenges, so they have the opportunity to accommodate and help you a little bit. If you don't tell them, then you may start to have problems. You may be written up at work. You may have issues, and people don't know that it's MS or that there's a way to help you through it. If you just have a buddy next to you that you want to talk to about it, I think that's fine if you trust them and they'll help you out. But if this is related to a work employment question, at some point you may have to let HR know so that your rights are activated and protected.
We have another comment. When I have cognition clarity, I can get really pushy because I genuinely want to get stuff done. Do you have suggestions to manage this?
Yes, because you're sort of describing me too. And that's where I go back to the list, because I have to prioritize. Okay, this is a good moment, and I need to do this. And people understand, because that's going to take an immense amount of energy, mental energy or physical energy, and I've protected that energy to accomplish this certain item. And there's no real time to over-explain that with people, or you've wasted some of your energy. But again, if you've told them in advance, I'm going to tackle this in the morning, whether it's painting a room or going to a grocery store or picking up the kids or doing something like that, if you've told them in advance, this is the best time for me to do this, then you'll probably have better cooperation. And everybody, again, is on the same page.
We have a couple of comments.
Hope that makes sense a little bit.
Makes sense to me.
Okay.
We have a couple of comments about, you'd mentioned the routine placement of things, but any suggestions and tips for something that's out of the ordinary? For instance, if you're traveling alone, we have one person who lost their wallet or left a purse at a meeting, kind of those out of the ordinary situations where you can't depend on your routine.
Well, losing your wallet, I don't know if you mean losing your wallet or getting it picked or something like that. Yes, sometimes when you go on a trip, if you're by yourself, I have found it useful to have the vital information duplicated. Now, maybe I've emailed the information or text, if that's easier for you, to yourself, so that you have whether it's a credit card number, don't do that with passwords, but if you want a list of what you have and what you don't have, or who has it, maybe again a spouse has a second credit card number. Maybe you want to put it in there, or if you email yourself your address, your agenda, your itinerary, contact person, their contact cell number for where you're going, all of that information, if you put it in, whether it's email or the cloud or whatever works for you, and if you think, well, maybe I don't have access to that, well, you know what? If you have a safety person, email them, CC them, and make sure you have their cell number or some way to contact them so that they can pull up that information for you. Hope that makes sense.
So we also had a question wondering if you know anything about how previous brain injuries might influence cognitive difficulties with like progressive MS.
That I would not feel comfortable answering. But definitely that is a vital question to bring. If you have a personal concern, bring it to your neurologist or professional, someone who may be a senior MRI or is diagnosed those concerns. The fact that you ask the question tells me it's vital, and hopefully it's been brought to somebody's attention, and hopefully you've received an answer that you respect and understand.
Thank you, Jeffrey. That is all that we have time for questions today. I just wanted to let you know I will be emailing you some really nice appreciative comments from folks. Everyone has been very thankful for this webinar, and we're so thankful that you gave us your time this morning.
Well, and thank you. I wish I could cover so much more, but I just tried to hit some of the vital topics, and I hope it hit home with whoever checked this out today. I appreciate the opportunity to share.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.